Attack on Fulani village kills at least 20 in central Mali. Rollout of Johnson & Johnson Ebola vaccine begins in Congo. And a Nigerian performer uses art as a development tool in slums. This is CGTN. Welcome to Africa Live with me, Beatrice Marshall, in Nairobi. We'll bring you the details on those stories in just a moment. But first, Rama Nyang with the day's business headlines. Rama.
That's right, Beatrice. Here's what's coming up in the course of the hour. AMCU signs a 3-year wage hike deal with South Africa's largest platinum mining companies. And Zimbabwe plans to cut value-added tax rates marginally to stimulate consumer demand. But does this cut go far enough? We'll answer that question in the course of the hour. For now, though, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Beatrice.
Rama, thank you. And let's begin with some distressing news from Mali. At least 20 people have been killed in an attack by gunmen on a Fulani village in the central region. The latest attack comes as communal violence continues to rise in the affected region. Conflicts between the farming Dogon community and the Fulani pastoralists have been ongoing for decades, but has become more and more deadly in the recent months. The Fulani herders have particularly been targeted because their perceived links to militants in both Mali and the neighboring Burkina Faso. A government spokesperson says security forces have been deployed to pursue the assailants. Security patrols have also been increased along the border. Now, days after the World Health Organization approved Merck's Ervebo vaccine for Ebola treatment, authorities in the Democratic Republic of Congo have launched trials on yet another vaccine by Johnson & Johnson. The trials are being carried out in Goma City. Here's Wilkista Nyabwa with the latest on that.
The race to find a lasting treatment for the Ebola virus is on. It has been days after the World Health Organization approved a vaccine by American-Canadian pharmaceutical Merck for use in combating the Ebola outbreaks. Now Johnson & Johnson has launched trials on its own vaccine in collaboration with the DRC's health ministry. Goma City, which lies on the border with Rwanda, is the chosen place for the administration of these trials, with 50,000 people targeted.
Most people are eligible for this vaccination. They have to be a year or older or do not have a chronic illness. Those who have survived Ebola are not eligible because they are already protected.
Unlike Merck's Ervebo, which requires a single shot, Johnson & Johnson's vaccine needs 2 injections administered 2 weeks apart.
I came to get the vaccination. I used to come often to ask when they will start providing us with the vaccinations. Today, I'm happy to have been vaccinated.
I came with a friend of mine. What brought me here was having seen my friends die of Ebola, and more people are falling victim to Ebola. I had to protect myself so that I do not also fall victim and be among the statistics of the dead.
The vaccine will be administered alongside Merck's Ervebo. Over 250,000 locals have already received the Ervebo vaccine under a ring vaccine campaign, which identifies and vaccinates those who have been in contact with possible Ebola patients. The last outbreak in the DRC was the second worst since the 2011 Ebola flare-up in West Africa, which killed over 11,000 people in Liberia, Sierra Leone and Guinea. Wilkista Nyabwa, CGTN.
Well, let's cross over to Chris Ochamringa. He's live for us in Kinshasa. He's got the latest on this development. Chris, so what more can you tell us about the rollout of the Johnson & Johnson Ebola vaccine that has now started in Eastern Congo?
Well, officials from the Ministry of Health are very excited about this development because they're saying now they have another tool, to bring this outbreak to an end. There has been a significant reduction in the number of cases, and they hope now with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine and the Ervebo that's manufactured by Merck, they will have what they need, to bring this outbreak to an end. They are targeting 50,000 people over a period of 4 months, and so they hope that they will reach these people who are at areas that are outside the places that have Ebola virus. They do not have an active transmission, but are considered to be at risk.
Well, Chris, some Congolese health officials have criticized the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, though, claiming that it has not been properly tested. How has it been received in Eastern Congo?
Well, in two stations, I spoke to officials in Goma who were in two stations where the vaccine was being administered, and they said they received more than 80 people. They're saying, you know, it was people expressed willingness. Many people in Goma, this is a city of about 2 million people, are just fed up of the Ebola outbreak. They're fearing that it might get back to their region, and people keep traveling a lot. And so there's interest shown. You know, no one is being forced to get these vaccines. It's you know, purely those who are willing to take it. And so there's been some interest, although there are people who are very against having any sort of vaccine for any illness. And that's the situation. Now, the controversy about some authorities who have been against it is started way back in early this year, you know, when there was officials were saying that, you know, this Johnson & Johnson vaccine hasn't got enough tests, and Congolese are not guinea pigs. They're saying this outbreak is very deadly, and that you know, the health authorities, international health authorities, are trying to, you know, impose this on them. The former DRC health minister, Ole Ilunga, was one of the people who was opposed to the introduction of this Johnson & Johnson vaccine, but his resignation in July this year paved the way, you know, for the introduction of this vaccine.
Well, Chris, no one is being forced to take up the vaccine, but what about the wider community, though? What's their reaction to the introduction of a second vaccine?
Well, it's a mixed reaction, I must say, because like I mentioned earlier, there are people in the DRC who are against getting vaccinated for religious or, you know, traditional or superstitious beliefs. And so those people, you know, will not accept getting this vaccine, however much they are sensitized by the international community or the DRC officials. But there are also people, you know, who have seen their relatives die of Ebola, and they want to bring this outbreak to an end. And so those people are cooperating with health authorities who are telling them that, look, you need to take this vaccine because, you know, it will protect you. This vaccine is different from the Merck vaccine. It's first of all given in 2 doses, 56 days apart, and it's supposed to protect them from, you know, being infected and also prevent future outbreaks. And that is what health workers are saying will be used to complement the use of the other vaccine by Merck. And so there's a lot of optimism, especially among healthcare workers in the DRC.
All right, some welcome relief there for the DR Congo. Chris Chamringa joining us there from Kinshasa. Thank you. Now, Somali and Kenyan leaders have agreed to restore ties following a meeting between their two heads of state in Nairobi. The two nations have been at loggerheads since earlier this year over oil and gas rights. CGTN's Abdulaziz Bilo has more.
In a joint press conference, Somali and Kenyan leaders announced the resumption of ties between the two neighbors, ending months-long standoff between the two East African nations.
We have a lot of things in common, our people to people, government to government, business to business. Of course, we have a trade, okay, that's really mutually benefit for both countries. And people basically take it our differences rather than our common interest.
Over the last couple of months, you know, we have had certain issues that have strained our relationship. But today we have agreed with my brother that there is need for us to ensure we bring normality to our relationship, we bring sensibility back to our relationship.
A maritime boundary dispute along the Indian Ocean is at the heart of the dispute. In 2014, Somalia sued Kenya at the International Court of Justice. The Hague-based court is due to hear the case in June 2020 after it was postponed 2 times.
And that's why I have to assure that the ICJ issue will not affect our bilateral relationship, and to make sure that we both benefit our government-to-government relationship.
So we agreed that from now onwards, we must do everything we can, especially as leaders, to ensure that our people live peacefully, they live happily, and we are able to work together because ultimately we are one people.
Experts welcome the recent engagement between the two countries. Following the talks in Nairobi, Kenyan authorities announced the resumption of direct flights and the issuance of visa on arrival to Somali citizens and diplomats.
This new diplomatic engagement between Mogadishu and Nairobi, declared by President Uhuru Kenyatta and his counterpart Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo in Nairobi, is very significant and timely in a sense that two countries cooperate in key areas, including security, that is fight on armed group Al-Shabaab, which is becoming a very big challenge to both countries.
The Somali leader also lauded Kenya's role in pacifying Somalia and AMISOM, the multinational African Union military force that has allowed Mogadishu to turn the tide in its fight against Al-Shabaab militant group that continues to pose a regional security threat. Tension between the two countries began early this year after Somalia hosted a major conference on oil and gas in London. Nairobi accused Mogadishu of auctioning oil and gas blocks in that disputed territory along the Indian Ocean, claims Somali authorities deny. For now, both sides seem to have struck a deal as they await the court's final judgment next year. Abdulaziz Bilal, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Well, let's get more on this diplomatic development, and I'm joined by Ahmed Abdihadi Abdullahi, a political analyst. He's based in Mogadishu. Thank you, Ahmed, for joining us on Africa Live. Now, Kenya and Somalia have agreed to normalize ties strained over a sea row. What is your take on their relationship?
I think it's the diplomatic effort that has been going on in the background. The current chair of the chairman of the African Union, Sisi, the president of Egypt, and the Ethiopian prime minister, and others, particularly American diplomats, have been working on this on the background to end the tension. And this is the result of their effort, I can understand. Furthermore, the Kenyans now understand that the pressure line can be substituted to more friendly line to Somali leaders, so that the question will be more friendly, the question of maritime, more than to be a question of hostility between the two nations. I think this is a breakthrough in the case, particularly given the recent tensions between the two nations.
Right, so this is a breakthrough, and Kenya has been asking for an out-of-court settlement on the maritime border row, something that Mogadishu has refused to agree to. What do you think is the best way forward for the two countries?
I think that what is good one country may not be good for another country. So mutual exclusive scenario looms large here. Somalis are feeling that they were politically and institutions weaker state, since Somalia has been in a state of anarchy and social unrest for a long time, took the question to the International Justice Court, ICJ, expeditiously. And Kenyans don't want that the case should end in the International Court of Justice, because given the international laws of this United Nations International of this UNCLOS, that Somalia is going to win the case. The probability is high Somalia is going to win the case, because you have a dispute in the sea, right, between two adjacent countries, and the parallel, equidistancy is the case always. And Somalia, the argument has its own merits. And I think that now the question will be negotiated diplomatically in one way, and Somalis are certain that the case should end in the International Court of Justice.
Ahmed Abdihadi Abdullahi joining us there from Mogadishu. Thank you for your insights. Well, let's now head to South Sudan, where celebrations have been held in Rumbek town following the appointment of women to key positions in the government of Western Lake State. Here's more on that.
A white dove of peace for the Deputy Governor of Western Lake State. This is in recognition of the step by the Governor to appoint not just one but two women as state ministers. For the locals, this is a rare moment that calls for celebrations.
Not only am I a female minister, but also a young female minister. So my position means that I represent both the youth and the women. So it means a lot to the women of Western Lake State, and the girls, especially the young girls. It will encourage them to go to schools and study hard. So it is more like a role model to the women of Western Lake State.
They are also here for yet another achievement. This is the appointment of a woman to a local traditional court to represent their interests. And the appointee is promising nothing but justice for women of the region.
I will not fear presenting women's issues even if I'm the only woman among men. I believe this initiative by Western Lakes State will be replicated everywhere in Lakes region.
This particular workshop was looking at how women pre-position themselves for the 35% in the revitalized peace agreement. But the discussion is also that beyond the revitalized agreement, beyond the 36 months, what more are the women supposed to do? Because women needs do not stop within the 36 months. So the view is that how are the women, how is the state and everybody involved going to to help the women to really empower themselves, because the empowerment is the issue, is what is the education, what is the economic activities, and what are their, how are they positioned in a way that they can support each other to go to heights.
For women of South Sudan, things are still not rosy. Injustice and violence at home against women continues in many parts of the country. And as the country disintegrated into a civil war, rape and other violations were visited on women as more sank into depression and poverty, thanks to widowhood as a result of the conflict. But with the signing of a peace accord in Ethiopia, a new world is unfolding. It is a moment that guarantees these women of the world's youngest nation not just peace, but also a moment to grow as individuals as the nation strives for a better and stable tomorrow. Laura Walubengo, CGTN.
And now to the latest on the crisis along Nigeria's land borders. Delegates from Nigeria, Benin and Niger now say they will ensure that people crossing their borders must display documents recognized by the Economic Community of West African States Regional Bloc, ECOWAS. In a joint communique, the leaders also agreed to set up a joint border patrol force to curb smuggling. Foreign ministers from the region met after Nigeria closed its land borders for trade until end of January next year. The move was aimed at tackling rampant smuggling in rice and other goods from Africa's biggest economy. This has created a crisis across the region. Well, let's get you the latest on this. I'm joined by CGTN's Phil Haza. He's live for us in Abuja in Nigeria. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai is joining us from the Ghanaian capital, Accra. Phil, first off to you though, Nigeria, Benin and Niger met to discuss the border closure issue. What has come out of their joint committee meeting in Abuja, in the capital?
Well, thank you. That meeting indeed occurred right here in Abuja, Nigeria's capital, at the ECOWAS headquarters. And of course, it happened on Thursday. It had foreign ministers from all three countries and other relevant authorities. Now, according to the foreign minister, Nigeria's foreign minister, Geoffrey Onyema, he says that the meeting was indeed necessary because all three countries have before now signed various agreements, and memorandum of understanding to ensure that smuggling activities around the borders are checkmated, but that has not been complied or adhered to. And he cited examples of rice smuggling, saying that foreign rice is still on the high in terms of its availability in Nigerian market. But at the end of the day, a communique was signed by all parties, and they've agreed to establish what they call a tripartite anti-smuggling joint border patrol team, which will ensure that smuggling activities at the different borders are checkmated and some form of sanity is brought to the borders.
Right. Nabil, Nigeria is a major trade partner for Ghana. How has Ghana been affected by the closure of the Nigerian border?
Indeed, many traders here in Ghana have been seriously affected by the border closure in Benin. We are hearing that some of the traders still have their goods stranded at the Nigeria-Benin border, and the goods are getting damaged. Last month, we had the Ghana Union of Traders Association actually reporting that traders are losing millions of dollars as their goods remain stranded at the Benin-Nigerian border. Also, we've had Ghana's largest local beverage manufacturer, Casapreco, reporting that since August, when the border was closed, it's lost more than $2 million US, and the impact of the border closure is still being felt by a lot of traders here in Ghana.
Well, Phil, the Nigerian border will remain closed until the end of January. How is the Joint Committee going to deal with the issues raised by Nigeria before they reopen the borders?
Well, we know that so far at the communique or at the meeting, the communique also revealed that the border patrol, the joint border patrol team will be made up of police, customs officials, immigration officials, Navy, and all relevant security personnel from the three different countries, and that will make up the force. They are also going to be saddled with the responsibility, and not just that, they'll be given the powers to arrest, to pursue, to escort and monitor goods in transit at their common borders. They're also expected to check travel documents properly from travelers who are moving across the borders. They're also expected to share intelligence information. They're also expected to sensitize the populace in and around these borders on the seriousness of the crime, talking about smuggling activities now. But, so far we know that they've fixed November 25th and 26th. That's just about a week away from now to reel out more of these details and, of course, come together as a tripartite force now to embark on their responsibility that they've just been saddled with.
And a final comment from you, Nabil. We do understand that there is a bit of tension between Nigeria and Ghana, especially in Kumasi. What more can you tell us about that?
Yes, following the border closure, some traders in Kumasi especially decided to also retaliate, sort of, because there are a lot of Nigerian traders also controlling the market here in Ghana. So this decided to actually lock some of the shops belonging to Nigerian, pushing government to enforce a law which bars foreigners from engaging in retail business in Ghana. So most of the shops of Nigerians remain locked since last 2 weeks. And then here in Accra, some other traders also in the commercial hub decided to also do same. Since last week, some over 100 shops of Nigerians still remain locked, and they are not backing down. They are saying they would want the government to enforce the law that bars foreigners from engaging in retail business here in Ghana, since Nigeria has decided to also close its borders to other West African neighboring countries. They feel this is time for Ghana to also act. This is not the first time we are seeing shops of foreigners, especially Nigeria, being closed due to this trade law that bars foreigners from engaging. It's happened over 20 years ago, and it's reignited due to the situation going on in the Nigeria-Benin border.
All right, Nabil Ahmed Rufai joining us there from Accra, and Phil Ihaza in Abuja in Nigeria. To you both, thank you. You're watching Africa Live. Still ahead on the program. New Sudanese government attracts tourists with upgraded pyramid sites. And the UN pledges support to support Somalia on climate-related disasters.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington Nairobi, and London. China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Sudan's new government is looking to its pyramids to boost tourist numbers. An influx of hard currency is sorely needed for the country to overcome its economic woes. The transitional government has eased visa regulations and has been upgrading its long-neglected antiquities. CGTN's Daniela Pearson reports.
These royal pyramids of Meroe aren't in Egypt. Instead, they can be found in the neighboring country of Sudan. They're from the Nubian Kush dynasty some 2,500 years ago. Like the Egyptians, members of the royal family here were also buried in pyramid tombs.
I'm excited, and I feel I'm in ancient time. It's very fantastic.
I saw lots of pictures, and we were sleeping nearby, so I was able to see it during the evening and in the morning. Until now, I found the landscape really beautiful, and people are really, really nice, always very welcome.
These antiquities may be smaller in size compared to those in Egypt, but there are many more of them dotted around ancient sites. Yet Sudan only attracts a fraction of the tourists that Egypt boasts.
Our idea was to film these archaeological sites from interesting perspectives that people have not seen before. We then turned them into videos and short documentaries to attract tourists.
If great infrastructure is provided at all tourist and archaeological sites in Sudan, if state support is provided, and if companies invest more in this industry, then I am sure that Sudan will be an attraction for tourists worldwide.
The public can now enter the pyramids for the first time ever and will soon be able to go into the tombs underneath. And with $135 million from Qatar, several of the pyramids will be restored after decades of neglect.
These drawings and carvings are threatened by the sand encroachment, which is considered the primary threat to the drawings, specifically the external ones. We are working on restoring them on a regular basis so that we can preserve them.
Sudan still remains an unlikely holiday destination. But with the new government's push for tourists, hopefully more people around the world will be able to appreciate the culture and history of Sudan. Daniela Pearson, CGTN.
In Somalia, local authorities and the United Nations have signed a multi-million-dollar deal aimed at addressing climate-related shocks that continue to affect the Horn of Africa nation. The country has recently experienced food insecurity, drought and deadly floods. CGTN's Abdulaziz Bello has the story from Mogadishu.
The $10 million project will target more than 360,000 farmers and pastoralists. The government officials and representatives from the UN Development Programme attended the signing ceremony in Mogadishu, just days after heavy floods displaced hundreds of thousands of people and destroyed farmlands in riverine areas.
We cannot wait every time for floods and drought to displace us. It's critical we reform the national policies and systems, building knowledge and skills at the national, state and community level, and expanding climate monitoring infrastructure and early warning systems.
Authorities say the project will equip pastoralists and small-scale farmers with skills to address flood management, water conservation, to sustainably produce farming and livestock products.
Floods and droughts are the same symptoms of the same problem, and that addressing them in this way is critically important. I want to indicate that this is the first time in Somalia that we have an integrated water resource management approach going forward. It takes some very innovative and important approaches for building the resilience of local communities against droughts and floods.
Somalia has been hit hard by climate-related shocks in the past years. Recent floods displaced over 300,000 people in towns and villages all across south and central Somalia. Drought in northern Somalia has forced pastoral communities to move to new regions in search of pasture and water. Livestock trade, mainly to Gulf countries, remains one of the country's principal source of revenue, but climate-related shocks continues to affect the critical sector. The government and some of its international development partners have been urged to end the culture of providing food assistance, but instead empower pastoralists and farmers to remain in their region by strengthening resilience programs. And as stakeholders embark on this latest project, humanitarian agencies say tackling root causes of climate change is critical in addressing natural disasters in the East African nation. Abdulaziz Bilo, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
A prominent university in Hong Kong has asked all non-students or staff to leave its campus immediately. The president of the Chinese University of Hong Kong says he will seek help from authorities if they do not comply with the request. It comes as anti-government protesters continue to paralyze parts of the city, with many college campuses seeing violent clashes this week. On Friday, demonstrators used barriers and other debris to block a critical Midtown tunnel, leading to severe traffic congestion. Meanwhile, police say a carriageway near the Chinese University of Hong Kong that had been blocked since Tuesday night has partially reopened. They have also asked the city's schools to do more to bring calm.
These rioters are paving the way to a man-made disasters. We urge the school management to shoulder their responsibility and make a clear stance against such lawless behavior and make a clean break with rioters.
Well, let's now go to Ramanyang for a look at the day's business news. Rama.
Thank you very much, Beatrice. Here's what's coming up in business. AMCU signs a 3-year wage hike deal with the largest platinum mining companies in South Africa. And authorities in Zimbabwe plan to cut value-added tax, but is a cut big enough to stimulate demand?
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
Daniel Tekle-Heymano is a pioneering icon of African cycling. He is a trailblazer in the truest sense of the word, competing internationally, achieving world-class results, and going where no other black African cyclist has ever gone before.
Welcome back to the program. Now, the Association of Mine Workers and Construction Union, better known as AMCU, has signed a 3-year wage hike deal with South Africa's largest platinum mining companies. After months of talks, the union reached a deal with Anglo American Platinum, Impala Platinum and Sibanye-Stillwater. Workers' monthly wages are expected to be increased by at least $67, taking into account future inflationary pressure. That in turn has brought a bit of relief into the sector, as officials expressed concerns over a prolonged strike that could essentially cripple production and worsen economic growth. In October, the union declined to waver on its wage increase demands, and it deferred negotiations with Amplats and Sibanye to the Commission for Conciliation, Mediation and Arbitration, the CCMA. Now, finding the right partners is a challenge in any business endeavor, and for banks that are looking to invest in rail infrastructure in particular, it's really hard. That in turn is what has led to a memorandum of understanding between the African Export-Import Bank, or the Afrexim Bank as it's more commonly known, and Tello DB. Now, that agreement is signed at the Africa Investment Forum this week that was recently held in Johannesburg, South Africa. CGTN's Angela Coppola was there.
The key problem facing railway network developers is finding solid research on the state of the continent's rail infrastructure and other logistics. Research that identifies the gap and provides a range of solutions.
It's not just to build a railway, it's not just to get the rolling stock, but we need to operate them efficiently. Again, this partnership provides a solution for operating and managing complex issues that surround rail.
Partnership with Afreximbank allows us to mobilize capital not only from the continent of Africa, from development finance institutions and commercial banks on the continent, but to mobilize capital much more broadly.
The MOU goes further than research and rolling stock, though. It's about being multimodal. But there are practical considerations when it comes to rail.
I think on the continent we have to start thinking about standardizing gauge. But the reality today is let's get goods moving from A to B.
We believe that it will help us drive our effort in developing and expanding the logistics infrastructure that will help us expand intra-African trade in the years ahead.
The expectation is that the African Continental Free Trade Area will actually increase intra-African trade significantly, some say by as much as 15%. But for that to become a reality, the continent's transportation systems need to be integrated and, more importantly, seamless. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Sandton, South Africa.
Authorities in Zimbabwe plan to cut the value-added tax rate from January next year to stimulate demand in an economy that's set to contract by almost 7% this year after drought and severe power shortages. Now, the Southern African nation is smack in the middle of its worst economic crisis in a decade, marked by shortages of foreign currency and fuel, as well as power cuts that last up to 18 hours every day. During the presentation of the 2020 budget statement, the country's finance minister, Professor Mthuli Ncube, proposed cutting the VAT rate marginally to 14.5% from 15% where it is at the moment, effective from January next year. He also proposed lowering the corporate income tax rate to just 24% from 25%. President Emmerson Mnangagwa is struggling to convince the country's population that his economic reforms will work. The prices of basic goods, fuel, electricity have all gone up sharply, but salaries have lagged far behind. The United Arab Emirates and Egypt have launched a massive $20 billion joint investment program designed to develop economic and social projects. This deal comes as the authorities in Cairo are looking for assistance to boost growth and future investment. The Abu Dhabi Crown Prince made the announcement while receiving the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi on a visit to the Emirati capital. The two leaders discussed ways of strengthening bilateral ties and enhancing coordination on a range of issues. Security in the region especially remains a challenge off the back of increased regional tensions, particularly in the wake of a string of attacks on oil tankers and ships in the Gulf that have been blamed on Iran. Tehran, on the other hand, has denied repeatedly any accusations of being responsible for those attacks. On to matters further afield now. This year's BRICS summit has wrapped up in Brasilia. The two-day event concluded with a declaration on the importance of improving cooperation among members of this bloc. CGTN's Yu Yang has the details.
A defense of multilateralism. That's a strong signal sent by the world's major emerging economies: Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa. BRICS leaders have inked a joint statement, the Brasilia Declaration. The document lays stress on overcoming challenges facing multilateralism, upholding the central role of the UN in international affairs, while building a community of shared future for mankind. It says there is an urgent need to reform multilateral organizations, including the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, and the International Monetary Fund. BRICS nations reiterated the importance of the rules-based, open, free, and inclusive international trade. The bloc speaks highly of new development banks' efforts in infrastructure and financing. It also says it will promote sustainable development in economic, social, and environmental dimensions. Chinese President Xi Jinping was particularly critical of the global rise of protectionism, in part reflected in the China-US trade conflict.
But there are also causes for concern. For example, increased protectionism and unilateralism, creating a governance, development, and reliability deficit.
The Brasilia Declaration also says BRICS members will stick to the Paris Agreement under the principles of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. The document reiterates the bloc condemns terrorism in all its forms and manifestations, and says that BRICS will also fight against internet and communication crimes. The BRICS summit is held annually, alternating among its 5 members. The bloc accounts for over 40% of the global population, and in 2018, BRICS countries accounted for 33% of global GDP. Despite navigating around different politics and culture, the group hopes to see the rewards through cooperation. Yu Yang, CGTN.
One last story for you. The China-based New Development Bank, essentially a creation of the BRICS, has approved more than $8 billion in loans for projects in its 5 partner countries since it was set up back in 2015. Brazil's allotment tops $620 million. A big chunk of that is going straight into renewable energy projects. Our correspondent in Brazil, Paula Cabral, visited a wind energy park in the country's northeast, which has benefited from these debt facilities.
In this part of Brazil's impoverished northeast, known as the Sertão, the backwoods, the land is dry and rain scarce for most of the year. Not many crops thrive in these conditions. But manioc, also known as cassava, will grow here, and most small farmers cultivate it to make starch and flour, a staple food ingredient for many people in this region. There is also lots of strong and constant wind, and such wind has become a source of energy for the country and income for hundreds of families here who are paid rental for the use of their land for wind turbines. Some landowners here with larger areas have up to a dozen turbines set up in their properties, and that does give them some good rental money. But the biggest impact we see here is in the lives of smaller farmers, usually poorer ones, who have space for 1 or 2 turbines. For them, the extra money can make a big difference. José Valdecir da Silva has 2 of these turbines set up on his land. The company that owns them pays the equivalent of about $400 per month for each one.
Some of the people decided to lease their lands and others didn't. Those who didn't now regret it because they're not getting the money. For us who did it, it's good. It's not a whole lot of money, but it's very helpful now because manioc prices are very low. The Ventos do Araripe Wind Energy Park was built by Brazilian company Casa dos Ventos and completed in 2017. It was partially funded with resources from the China-based New Development Bank, the NDB, also called the BRICS Bank. That NDB funding here in Ventos do Araripe came to about $67 million out of a total of $621 million allocated by the bank for projects across Brazil between 2016 and 2018.
Important to have the support of NDB, not only as a financial standpoint to enhance our capability for the project, but also they bring a lot of experience on structuring these kinds of projects.
The mayor of the 14,000 inhabitants town of Simões, where most of the park's turbines are located, says the 300 towers set up in their territory make a big difference for the city.
The wind park has certainly helped the farmers around here because they receive an income from the use of their land. And this income also helps to boost the local economy and benefits all citizens.
There are many opportunities for investment in infrastructure in Brazil, including those with great potential to improve people's lives. Brazilians will no doubt continue to look to international institutions like the New Development Bank to help make these projects a reality. Paulo Cabral, CGTN, Simões, in Brazil.
And I'll leave it there for the time being. I'll be back at the top of the hour, though. We'll be looking at the crippling effects of a general strike, essentially, by staff at South African Airways. All of it's about 50 aircraft are essentially grounded, and it will remain so all the way through to Monday. What happens next? We'll find out live from Johannesburg. For now, though, back to Beatrice.
Rama, thank you. And we still have more news for you here on the program. Here's what's ahead. We'll be looking at how a Nigerian performer uses art as a development tool in slums. It is often said that art has the power to change the world. Well, that is exactly what is happening in one of the crowded slums in the Nigerian economic capital, Lagos, where a performing artist is using art as a tool for community development. Sean Awobajo's footprints of David art uses theatre to get poor children off the streets and harness their hidden talents. Here's Deji Badmus with that story.
He was born and raised in this slum community in the heart of Lagos and was once like this carefree children playing freely on the streets of Bariga. At some point, he even scavenged at dump sites in the community for a living. It is also here that Seun Awobajo got the inspiration to overcome all the odds and get a university education. The theatre arts practitioner is now helping other children in the community do the same through cultural dance, drama, and music. The parents of these kids can barely afford school fees, and most of them often take up menial jobs to survive. However, in this theatre group founded by Awobajo, they have found not just a sense of belonging amid surrounding difficulties, but also hope for a bright future.
Art for me is a way of life, and I predominantly am using art now as a tool to help my community. If you tell people you are from Bariga, there's almost 50% of your chances gone already because you are from this environment that has a cliche of violence, of struggles, and all sorts of bad negativity around.
With the help of art, he's gradually changing the narrative on Bariga and its youth. All the young people here are part of his Footprints of David art group. He picks them off the streets of the community and engages them in performance art. He and his wife even caters for some of the children's academics, feeding and accommodation.
Over the years, we were able to retrace the ways of some of these disadvantaged kids in our area with this art. Like practically there are countless of them who are roaming on the streets, sleeping in dilapidated buildings, some permanently on the dung sites. Even some find it difficult to even go to school. So by His grace, we were able to help one or two out of their current situation and bring them back to school, revive them to my personal house where I house quite a number of them, and also teach them performance arts.
Being part of the group has taken the children to places most of them never dreamt of. With the help of sponsorships, Awobajo's Footprints of David art has been able to travel beyond borders to perform, entertain and educate.
These kids today have performed before a lot of presidents, past presidents, current president of Nigeria, president of France, president of Germany. We've been together to almost 36 states in Europe where we've played our art, and currently we have about 168 of them now in our private school. We wish to do more because quite a number of them are still out there who need help.
Awobajo says his vision is to raise the children from age 6 to 16 when he feels they would have been equipped to face the world before letting them go. So far, he's keeping to that vision. But it's not been easy, he says.
We still need a lot of help because as we speak, I really don't even know what's going to happen tomorrow for some of these kids. So we're hoping good Nigerians can show more support. Just come and mentor any of these kids. Come and volunteer to be a teacher in our free school and come around and just show some love with them. It's something that would be nice.
He's not just the instructor of the children, he is definitely their hero. Deji Badmus, CGTN, Bariga, Lagos.
And your sports news coming up next. Here's what's ahead. The Court of Arbitration for Sport rejects English Premier League champions Manchester City's financial fair play appeal.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
We start in South Africa, where a boxing club is striving to make a difference in the lives of township children. The UJAB Boxing Club in Zandspruit, Johannesburg, was founded in October of 2016 under the Football Without Borders banner. Now it uses boxing to keep children off the streets and away from drugs and crime. Here's CGTN's Julie Shire.
Zandspruit, an informal settlement in Johannesburg. And in a ramshackle zinc hut, UJAB Boxing Club keeps the youth away from crime and drugs.
Boxing helps kids learn self-defense, but at the same time it helps kids also learn about conflict resolution. The area that we operate in is Zandspruit Informal Settlement. It's basically an area that has high crime rate, high school dropout rate, so kids need to learn how to protect themselves in this environment, but at the same time teach them life skills, because we want them to grow up to be productive adults in this community.
The boxing project is based on the international NGO Fight for Peace model, which specializes in using boxing as a tool for conflict resolution.
Those from 13 to 16, they're usually going things like drinking, drug abuse. By the time they're 14, they already have kids, and also issues of gangs. 8 out of the 10 adults that you meet are holding drinking bottles. So you find the kids have got no role models, so the role models that they see are the gangsters, adults going into nightclubs and everything like that.
It's changed my life in a really good way because firstly I had sort of like anger management things, so I was always that person who's always angry at everything, and as a child I was really obese, so I wanted to lead a healthy life, and then boxing really did show me that.
UJAB helps these youngsters stay on the right path by channeling their energy into sport.
Our elders, our brothers, they smoke drugs, and they drink alcohol. So they tell us to drink or smoke. But after school, I come to gym. After gym, I go home because I don't want to drink, I don't want to smoke.
I want them to become professional boxers, but at the same time, I think I want them to become leaders in the community and also understand the value of education and actually understand that they can do anything in life.
The club currently competes in tournaments and is possibly shaping the country's next fighter generation. But above that, this township now has a healthy, fun and dedicated community safe hub for young boxers. Julie Shire, CGTN, Zandspruit, South Africa.
In football, FIFA Secretary General Fatma Samoura and the Confederation of African Football President Ahmed arrived in South Sudan for a one-day visit on Thursday. Ahmed and Samoura met with the South Sudan Football Association President Francis Amin in Juba. The team held discussions on how they can work together to promote football in the country, while also assessing progress made in the construction of the Juba Football Stadium. The capital city's only stadium is currently under construction, overseen by the Metallurgical Company of China. Samoura had earlier attended the first ever Women's Football Task Force workshop in Cairo.
We are here to see what the President Francis and his team start to build for the football in Juba. We know, but we never see. But now we are going to touch it and to see CAF and FIFA to find what has done and what we can do more.
Further afield, Manchester City's attempt to hold a UEFA investigation into allegations that the club breached financial fair play regulations has failed after the Court of Arbitration for Sport threw out its appeal on Friday. The CAS General Secretary Matthew Reeve told the press that the English Premier League champions' appeal has been judged inadmissible. UEFA opened an investigation into City over potential breaches of its break-even rule in March after German publication Der Spiegel reported that the city's Abu Dhabi owners inflated sponsorship agreements to comply with requirements. The financial fair play rules are intended to prevent clubs from receiving unlimited amounts of money through rich owners and inflated sponsorship deals.
There was absolutely no examination of the merits. So it's just